Hi, welcome back to our series all about how to do Fix differently. In this episode, I want to talk a little bit about reuse. So reuse is the idea of minimal effort gives you the maximum benefit. It's all about increasing automation and reusing the assets they actually have. Greater efficiency flows from that. So before we delve into exactly what I'm talking about here, let's investigate some of the symptoms that might indicate that you are perhaps not reusing your assets as well as you can today. So how often is it that you have seen you haven't got the latest version of the document? There's a little bit of confusion about exactly which version to send out to our customers. What about the situation where you have perhaps a new joiner into your team and they take months and months and months to become productive, to be conversant with exactly what it is that your API can do so that they can help customers? How often do you find that actually there's something that's undocumented or poorly documented today in your API specifications, or is simply just flat out wrong? Perhaps it just needs to be updated and nobody's done it. Now, these are all symptoms of people not really thinking about reusing their specification in particular for something else. Now, you might sit there and think, well, hang on, that feels the opposite to the way that we behave today, right? The documentation is something that gets written right at the end. And if you watch some of our other episodes all about spec-first development, you realize that actually, no, there's an increasing trend now towards flipping it on its head. You write the documentation first, and then you write the implementation to match the documentation. That's one of the things I really want to explore in this particular episode is how do you write your documentation and then reuse that documentation in various different places in your work process to unlock a new area of efficiency for your firm. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about having a single source of truth. I'm talking about having one document that is actually correct and accurate and complete in terms of your specification. You write it once and then you reuse it lots of different places. So where would you think about using these things? Well, configuring your Fix engine, configuring your middleware systems. Perhaps you have parsing tools today. Maybe they're based on the Fix standards. That tends to be the trend that we see. You can improve that by using this documentation as well. QA and certification, exactly what your API is supposed to do, exactly what you're asking your customers to demonstrate to you that they're able to do. These are all uses of where you can reuse documentation. And of course, flowing all of that documentation out into either a human-readable format, PDF, Word, or into a machine-readable format, Quick Fix, Fix Orchestra, FinSpec, something like that. These are all great uses of great examples of reuse, and that's exactly what I'm talking about here. So there are two specific goals that you're driving for whenever you're thinking about reuse. One is clearly efficiency. So I'm going to write it once and I'm going to reuse it elsewhere. Stop having to reinvent the wheel. Stop having all of those cracks and the little game of telephone that goes on where something falls through the cracks. But the more important one, the one I want to focus on here today, because it's a little bit less obvious, is closing the loop between what your documentation says should exist and what actually exists, right? So let me give you some examples of what that looks like if you've done it right. QA. If you have a document that pushes into your QA system, then actually what you're doing is you're checking truly that your system does what you say that it does. That's important to demonstrate. Certification. If you're using that document, again, in your certification process to validate whether customers have correctly sent in a message or not, then you are proving that your clients can really send in what you have told them to send in. Parsing. If you put an electronic document into a parsing tool and let's actually point that thing over to production, what you're proving is that production behaves in the way that you've described as well. So when I talk about closing the loop, that's exactly what I'm saying, is your documentation needs to become something that is reusable in these various different areas, QA, certification, and production in terms of parsing. And by throwing all of that data at your document, you're proving to yourself that in all of those three environments, the two actually match up, that your document and your API actually behave in the same way. So if you're interested in this concept, the next step then is to think about, well, what requirements do I have, right? How do I start this whole process? So the key thing to avoid in terms of thinking about what requirements for coming up with reuse is the trap that I see people fall into time and time again. And that trap is to think that this is something that a developer writes that really only captures messages, fields, and enumerations. Okay, so I see people jump straight to, oh, the answer is quick fix. I'm going to ask my developers to constantly maintain a quick fix dictionary. That doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't really work is because you can't give that document out to one of your end users, the end developers in those customers, and allow them to understand exactly what your API means, because there's a whole load of words that need to go around it. There's descriptions of what that functionality actually means, the life cycle of your day, what symbology is acceptable in your particular platform or trading service. These things are not captured in a quick fix document. So it isn't just the capturing of fields, messages, and enumerations. You also need to capture this human-readable content as well. And that's one of the biggest things to avoid. The weakest link always in creating documentation and making it reusable is the transfer between the developers, the guys who think in terms of messages, fields, and enumerations, and the business, the guys who need to describe the functionality in human-readable terms. That's always your weakest link. You must accommodate those two different forces and have them into a single document, a single source of truth. And what that does is that means that your range of options, the technical options in which you can capture this electronic specification, are narrowed, okay? So what options are generally available? Well, you could think about having some sort of bespoke object or some sort of bespoke class that captures all of these, both the technical elements and the human readable elements. I would strongly, strongly, strongly advise against that route. Anything that you do in your firm from this particular perspective is not unique to you. There's absolutely zero point in you reinventing this particular wheel. All it's going to do is cause you greater levels of pain down the road and a lot more technical debt that really is not really in your core unique selling point. Similarly, please avoid any sort of quite limited format like quick fix. Quick fix is good for the technical, but it does not address the human readable piece at all. So that leaves you with some other options. The more recent formats that are out there, Fix Orchestra from the fixed trading community, FinSpec from us at FixSpec. Those are much better formats for you in terms of being able to accommodate both the two key elements here, the technical element and the human readable element. Now we're going to leave some links to those assets in the bottom of this video, so please do go and check out those when you have time. Final thing then to touch on here is, well, how do I move? How do I move from where I am today, which might be a collection of, let's say, quick fix files or ATDL files, perhaps some Word documents. How do I move from that over to this new world? Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that this is easy or free. There's a piece of work that needs to happen. There's a project that needs to be spun up. And so here are the key elements, the key stages that you need to go through. The first one is understanding the various different business areas and business processes that need to consume this new asset that you're about to create. Can your QA team use it? Can your certification tooling use it? Can you push it into a parsing tool? What you want to do is you want to get buy-in across all of those various different areas as soon as you possibly can. If you're building something just for one area of your organization and other people haven't embraced it, don't think they're ever going to use it, you're probably starting out in a quite handicapped position, because it'll then be more difficult to convince them later on to discard whatever it is that they're doing and move to your new way of doing things. So you want to get broad agreement across your business areas about exactly which processes are going to use this. Get that agreement up front, and then you can start talking about the format. Choosing the format is the next step. Really, really be careful about which one you do. This is what I just said earlier. Please avoid anything that's bespoke. Please avoid anything that's quick fix. Those are two areas that will probably lead to a lot more technical debt long term. Choose something like Fix Orchestra or the FinSpec format as being a more appropriate choice. And then finally, once you've got agreement on all those two things, the next job then is to convert it. So how do you take your existing assets and convert it into these new formats? Well, there are some utilities out there to allow you to do this conversion. So there is a tool up on GitHub where you can take a markdown document and convert that into a Fix Orchestra file, for example. For FixSpec, we've built a Word import tool, so you can take your Word document and import it into a FinSpec tool. There is, however, no really good shortcut for moving to this new electronic world. It is a bit of manual work. I'm not going to hide it from you. It might be the sort of thing, however, that you may be able to go and just get some one-time consulting to do. And certainly we'd like to have a conversation with somebody if you're interested in doing that. One final point, just to sum all this up. if you take the effort and the time to move towards these electronic documentation in order to facilitate the reuse that I'm talking about here, it's critically important that you don't then backslide. Don't go ahead and build an Orchestra file or a FinSpec file and then decide, okay, the next version of my document, I'm going to just roll back to doing things in the old-fashioned way of Word as well. That really is destroying any value that you're actually creating. So it's important to think about how you actually distribute the specification directly from that new format out to your existing customers, how you show them the differences they need to make from one version to another version, for example. That's really important as well, okay? So hopefully this has been useful for you. Hopefully it's given you a good flavor for what you might be able to do with greater reuse, unlocking new efficiencies if you move to something a little bit more electronic. If you have any comments about this, if you're interested in learning more about Fix Orchestra or the FinSpec format, please get in touch, leave a comment below, subscribe for more updates. See you next time.